Windmark Canyon was already breathing heat by mid-morning. The wind that coiled through its red rock ribs didn't soothe so much as it tested, tugging against hats, dry lips, and scopes balanced too delicately on custom tripods. Across the rim, targets stood like distant glints of steel, beginning at 900 meters and vanishing into haze past 1,500. To the untrained eye, it looked like landscape. To the 100-odd competitors, it was a silent gauntlet of humiliation and glory. A simple woman stood at the registration table, her name scrawled in dry ink on the last line of the roster. The man behind the folding table didn't look up when he handed her the shooter badge, just smirked slightly at the number on her card. Lane 24. Bottom seed. She nodded, slipped the laminated tag into her vest pocket, and turned away without speaking. She carried a clean Barrett MRAD rifle with no decals or customization, the kind of weapon someone would call basic if they were being generous. She had no sponsor patch, no club affiliation, and no audience. Other competitors were already unpacking around her. Glossy black hard cases snapped open like suit jackets before a gala, polished bolts, carbon barrels, rangefinders, arm-braced spotting tablets. The air smelled of oil, graphite, and cologne. Most of the shooters were men in their 30s or 40s, sun-creased and overconfident. Some were veterans, some engineers, some influencers who monetized their marksmanship on social media. They greeted each other in bursts of laughter, slapping shoulders and comparing drop data like baseball cards. Andrea wore a sun-faded flannel shirt tucked into olive cargo pants and dusty boots. Her dark hair was pulled into a low knot at the base of her neck. She moved with the quiet intent of someone trying not to be noticed, which only made her stand out more. One man eyed her gear and whispered to another. Subtle laughter followed as she passed. The Barrett felt too long in her hands, its weight pulling slightly left, as if it remembered a different owner. A voice crackled across the PA system. "And let's give a big Windmark welcome to our wildcard entry today, Ms. Andrea Clark, Lane 24. She's bringing the mystery this year. Folks, or maybe just a spreadsheet." More laughter. The voice belonged to Cody Banks, the event's MC, a former local newscaster turned range personality. He stood on a platform above the firing line, mic clipped to his collar, sunglasses glinting under a branded ball cap. "Not Ladies' Day, is it?" came a voice from behind her. She turned slightly to see Griffin Rhodes, a former Marine and regional champion, arms crossed over his vest. His smile was tight, predatory. "You sure you're in the right place?" he added, just loud enough for the nearby group to hear. "I guess we'll see," Andrea said, adjusting the rifle strap over her shoulder and walking past him. Brett Callan chimed in from the bench beside the sandbags. "Manual mode. You're gonna spreadsheet a miracle, sweetheart." He lifted his range tablet, flashing the calibrated interface. "We're doing real-time ballistics here, not a science fair." Andrea didn't respond. She moved to her lane, unfolded the mat, and began setting up in slow, practiced motions. The murmurs didn't stop. She could hear phones buzzing comments from the event live stream displayed on tablets and side monitors. She saw herself briefly on screen as she awkwardly positioned her elbow, her face half shadowed by her ball cap. Heat shimmered up from the canyon floor, distorting the steel silhouettes lined along the ridge opposite. Wind swept the edge of the rim, curling around her cheek like a dare. Her hands trembled as she opened her data book, but not from nerves. Not really. It was the pressure of being observed, weighed, dismissed before she'd even fired a single round. She adjusted the bipod, checked the chamber, and sighted downrange. The Barrett felt heavy now, unfamiliar. It wasn't the same as simulation. It wasn't lab work or modeling. It was breath and metal and gravity, and everyone behind her was watching to see if she would fold. She eased herself prone, left elbow tucked under, right leg flat. The rifle clicked softly into alignment, its body resting on the mat like a waiting animal. Behind her, someone laughed too loudly. Another camera shutter clicked. The wind rose again, and this time she didn't flinch. She exhaled once, long and steady. Then she settled her cheek to the stock. She did not fire. Not yet. The night before the competition, Andrea sat alone in her car, parked on a gravel overlook just beyond the outer fence of Windmark Canyon. The range lights below had already gone dark, leaving only the outline of the cliffs in silhouette, sharp against a sky burning down to indigo. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the soft hum of her air vents and the faint rustle of her notes in the passenger seat. She had reviewed her checklists twice. Everything was packed and calibrated: the rifle's optic, the rear sandsock, the backup chart, the elevation corrections for each range increment. But still, she couldn't bring herself to sleep. Instead, she reached into her pack and pulled out a worn leather logbook. The corners curled, the spine cracked. Logan's handwriting still filled its pages: angles, distances, wind calls, a neat archive of another life. They'd lived in a quiet third-floor walk-up in Fort Worth, surrounded by coffee mugs, cables, and calibration paper. She remembered him scrawling drift values in the margins while she typed out code for the ballistics module they were testing. He'd taped targets to the kitchen walls to demonstrate angles, tracing bullet arcs between open cabinet doors. Their evenings were quiet, but never still. They worked in tandem. She built the algorithms, and he tested the limits of their logic. Logan had been a Marine sniper, methodical, sharp-eyed, and endlessly patient. He never once questioned her presence in their world of shooters and simulations. He didn't just believe she could shoot. He insisted she had the temperament for it. "It's not about firepower," he used to say. "It's about stillness, breath. You already have that." But she hadn't fired a round since the day she got the call. A routine training accident. They said sudden, unpreventable, final. For months afterward, she couldn't enter a range, not even a simulation room. She buried herself in work at Tesseron Labs, writing line after line of ballistic logic into target logic v6.2. The very system now embedded in nearly every elite scope. Her name was in the back-end documentation: Andrea Clark, lead engineer, but never mentioned aloud. She didn't care. She didn't want the credit. She wanted distance from the life she'd shared with him. It wasn't until a few weeks ago, while cleaning out an old storage box, that she found the logbook again. Tucked between pages was a yellow sticky note with Logan's handwriting, faded but legible. It read, "You know the math. Fire one for me." She traced her finger over the words that night, then closed the book and held it to her chest. She hadn't decided to win anything. She wasn't there to prove a point. She had no interest in trophies or rankings. She had entered the Windmark Open Division to fire one shot clean, undistorted, and deliberate. A shot that mattered, not because of how far it would travel, but because of where it had come from. She leaned her head back against the seat, eyes closed. Wind brushed over the roof of her car, soft and steady, a breath across steel. Her mind wandered through the data again. Wind velocity at 1,200 meters, temperature drift across the barrel, drop curve rates against the incline. She could see it all. Not just numbers, but the shape of it, the rhythm. Still, she remembered Logan's warning not to hide behind calculations. "Feel it," he once told her as they lay side by side on the apartment floor. Rifles pointed out an open window onto paper targets across the alley. "You already know the math. Feel the rest." Andrea opened the glove box and took out a small silver chain. The ring threaded through it was scuffed and simple. She slipped it over her head and let it fall beneath her shirt. Then she unzipped her bag and placed the logbook gently inside. She sat for a long moment in the quiet. She wasn't nervous. She was remembering. This competition wasn't for them. It was for him. For her. For the shot that still waited. The first round began at 600 meters, a warm-up by Windmark standards. Andrea lay prone on her mat, her cheek against the stock, eyes steady behind the scope. Her first 3 shots landed just inside the outer ring, enough to score, but far from impressive. The other competitors noted it with amused glances and low commentary she pretended not to hear. Griffin Rhodes leaned against a nearby bench, arms crossed. $10 says she doesn't finish the second bracket, he said to the group forming around him. 15 says she drops the rifle before the 1,000-meter mark. No one disagreed. At 900 meters, Andrea adjusted for the canyon wind using her own calculations. She wasn't using the auto-sync or community wind tables displayed on the public monitors. Her eyes flicked to her small field notebook where she'd scribbled conditions. She tapped in manual values on her phone's calculator, no touchscreen scope. No real-time telemetry. Just her inputs and the trajectory logic she helped design years ago. Brett Callan noticed. She's using manual entry like she's debugging a satellite, he said, holding up his scope tablet for others to see. Lady, this isn't a math club. Just guess like the rest of us. Laughter again. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. Behind the bench, Kendrick Voss, one of the officiating judges, raised his voice over the PA system. Shooter at lane 24, watch your cheek weld. That won't hold at longer range. His voice echoed across the canyon wall. Andrea said nothing. She made the correction. 3 lanes over, a man lifted his entire muzzle off the bag during a shot, grunted, and was met with a shrug and a joke from Kendrick. No warning, no call-out. By the 400-meter mark, Andrea was hitting with mild consistency just on the edge of the inner ring, a pattern steady enough to draw uneasy looks. That was when someone nudged her bench during reset. Just a small jolt. As she reached for her notebook, her scope had been knocked a degree off. She recalibrated quickly. Silent. She didn't ask who had bumped it. Later, when she asked a procedural question at the scoring tent confirming whether scoring rings were full or partial edge, she was ignored. 2 minutes passed before a younger man repeated her question. Only then did the official respond, as if it had just been asked. In the background, the live stream cameras kept rotating between featured lanes. But Andrea's image was the only one being replayed with slow-motion clips, her elbow shifting awkwardly, her eye closing too soon. Chat overlays scrolled across the mounted screens. That recoil. Manual mode. Barbie is really out here spreadsheeting the wind. Is she lying down or taking a nap? A meme began to spread by midday. A still frame of her reaching back toward her ammo box, face half-turned, mouth slightly open. Someone captioned it, "When Excel crashes mid-shot." The image appeared on phones, got shared in private group chats, and reached the clubhouse lounge within an hour. At the refreshment tent, Andrea stood behind 3 competitors as they filled cups from the cooler. No one turned. No one offered space. When she stepped aside to avoid the cluster, a 4th man stepped into her spot without looking at her once. Meanwhile, the judges called out praise for other competitors. "That's real marksmanship," Kendrick said over the mic when Rhodes fired a high arc correction into shifting crosswind. "Great instinct." Andrea had made the same call 3 minutes earlier. Hers had been labeled lucky. The mat beneath her rifle remained clean, almost clinical. No branded patchwork, no sand or sweat stains. Around her, competitors lounged on well-worn canvas, their team names stitched into padded mats. Their identities were sewn into the gear. Andrea's identity remained unclaimed. Through all of it, she said nothing. She adjusted her gear. She recalculated windage. She kept breathing through her nose, in quiet intervals, just as Logan had taught her. She hadn't opened his firing log. It stayed zipped in her range bag beside her, untouched but present, like a weight not yet shifted. Her phone buzzed once, an alert from the range app. Leaderboard refresh. Her name lit second to last. The numbers glowed just above the dirt. One more round before elimination cutoff. One more chance to be dismissed. The crowd behind her grew louder. Men joked about updating her meme. Cody Banks returned to the mic with performative energy. Up next, Andrea Clark, our underdog engineer. Let's see if math can fly at 1,200 meters. A few chuckles rolled through the observation deck. Andrea adjusted the elevation knob on her optic. Wind flared across the canyon rim, sharp and erratic. She leaned into the rifle, her hand steady. Her finger hovered just above the trigger. The air felt like tension incarnate. Quietly, beneath her breath, she whispered, "Logan, now." Andrea sat motionless in the front seat of her car, parked just beyond the last line of tents and rifles. The gravel beneath her tires crunched softly as the wind picked up, slipping across the windshield like a breath trying to find its way in. Outside, Windmark Canyon stretched wide and empty, its jagged rim casting shadows over the scorched terrain below. The vastness offered no comfort. It simply was. Her rifle lay across the back seat, untouched since the last round. On her lap sat the notebook, still open to the same page she'd been staring at for 15 minutes. Scoring metrics, weather data, scatter diagrams, all accurate, all irrelevant now. She had done everything by the book, every correction, every adjustment. And still, she had become the punchline. Her phone buzzed with another notification. She didn't look. Instead, she opened her range bag slowly, almost without sound, and pulled out Logan's firing log. The leather was worn and warm from the sun. She hadn't opened it in over a year. Not since the day she packed up his uniforms, taped shut the last box, and handed back the keys to their old apartment. The pages inside were covered in clean lines of looping handwriting, notes on crosswinds, angles, wind calls. Embedded between numbers were small moments, tiny sketches of bullets, sarcastic arrows, question marks where even Logan had second-guessed himself. She turned to the back, past the last entry, and found the single folded square of paper tucked there. "Trust the math. Fire one that matters." She read the words twice, then a third time. There was no anger in her, no burning need to prove them wrong, only a still, sobering realization that she hadn't been competing at all. She had been shrinking, hiding behind politeness, behind silence, letting herself be weighed by people who didn't know the system they depended on had come from her hands. She unlocked her phone and opened the back-end interface to Target Logic V6.2. No tutorial screens, no calibration wizard, just rows of code, variables, and toggles. She swiped past the default protocol and tapped into the developer override. Manual mode, full unlock, Coriolis effect engaged, elevation curve set to her own parameters, wind index, custom. She opened a fresh page in her notebook, flipped her pen between her fingers, and started writing. Velocity, drift, temperature delta, parallax error. Her handwriting was steadier now, familiar in the way muscle memory always was. She worked quietly, just as she had at the kitchen table all those years ago, when Logan cooked while she calculated, laughing as she told him to stop stirring the soup with his bore rod. Her fingers no longer trembled, her breath leveled, not because of courage, because of control. This was the language she trusted, the math she built. The wind gusted again, louder this time. She listened, measured, logged the rhythm against the rim wall. She could feel the environment now, not just observe it, as if the canyon had opened something in her. Andrea closed the notebook, sealed the logbook, and tucked them both carefully into her pack. The sun had begun to lower, brushing the edge of the range in molten gold. She stepped out of the car. There was no fanfare, no sudden applause, only gravel underfoot and the endless hush of canyon air. She walked back toward the platform, not to win, but to fire one that mattered. The wind rolled low and dry as Andrea stepped onto the line for the 200-meter shot. The sky had deepened into a hard, metallic blue, and the air along the canyon rim smelled faintly of dust and spent brass. She moved with quiet finality, each step calm, every motion exact. The murmurs that usually followed her had stilled. She laid out her mat, adjusted her position, and unfolded the bipod legs of the Barrett with slow precision. Then she settled prone, cheek to stock, eyes sharp behind the scope. No jokes came from the crowd this time. The first shot rang out like a pin dropped in a cathedral. A second later, the steel plate at 200 meters shivered. The impact was dead center, confirmed by the target camera before the echo had fully faded. No spin, no drift, just a single hole in the middle of a square of metal larger than a door but smaller than their expectations. Someone in the crowd exhaled with a low, surprised sound. Another whispered, "Did she just—" Andrea reloaded, adjusted for nothing. Fired again. Another center hit. The second steel plate clanged and trembled. The sound echoed once, then fell into silence. Other shooters paused mid-prep, hands frozen over bolts and tablets. Spectators turned, cameras lifted, heads angled. Brett Callan stood at the edge of his lane, jaw tightening. At 300 meters, the third shot landed less than an inch off center. The screen flickered with camera confirmation. The announcer, Cody Banks, stammered slightly. Shooter Clark with another direct contact at 1300. His voice had lost its casual bite. Full manual input. No spotter support. Andrea said nothing. At 400 meters, she paused only briefly, breathing through her nose. The wind skated sideways along the canyon floor, stirring small whirlpools of dust between the rocks. She watched the movement, tracked it by rhythm, not readings. Then she adjusted elevation 3 clicks and fired. The sound reached the target just after the impact. The screen blinked with a center zone mark, and the audience behind her erupted. People clapped in bursts, not knowing if they should cheer or stay silent. Griffin Rhodes fired 2 shots during his round, both wide. His expression shifted into something taut and uncertain. When he passed her bench, he didn't speak, didn't make eye contact. Then the signal came for the final round. 1 shot, 1,500 meters, no second chances, no corrections. Andrea lay down again. The canyon yawned before her, wide and echoing, a landscape of orange dust, wind-blasted shale, and distant green veins of sagebrush. The steel plate shimmered far ahead, just a small glint barely visible to the naked eye. She calculated drift using rock shadows, wind ripple, and the feel of resistance in her cheek. She made no visible effort. Only the math happened in her breath, her muscles, her memory. Target logic was open on her phone, tucked beside her mat. The override field glowed softly. No active telemetry, just the interface she had written years ago. Her numbers, her model. She didn't flinch when she pressed the trigger. The Barrett's recoil pulsed into her shoulder with a low, grounded kick. She remained still. Even her exhale felt measured. 3 seconds later, the impact light on the target flashed red. Direct hit. The crowd stood still for a full beat before sound returned in a wave applause. Shouts. Disbelief. Cody Banks's voice cracked across the speakers. "That's 1,500 confirmed. Center punch. No correction. Manual override. Holy hell." Behind the benches, judges stood, conferring rapidly. Kendrick Voss glanced at the screen twice, then at the spotter feed, then at Andrea's untouched scope dial. He said nothing. Rusty Harlan, the longtime club official and former instructor, stepped forward. "What did you use?" he asked. Not challengingly, but curiously. Andrea lifted her phone, thumb resting on the screen. "Target Logic V6.2, she said evenly. "Manual override." Callan blinked. "We all use that." Dean Holloway, a retired vet watching from a shaded chair, straightened. "She's Clark, the Tesseron Clark." His voice carried across the silence. Someone pulled out a phone and searched. Another tapped a shoulder. Soon the crowd shifted awkward, alert, searching her name. Andrea didn't move. Old white papers appeared on screens. Defense journals. Archived interviews with blurred-out faces and redacted co-authors. Her name had never been publicized, but in the software credits, buried in documentation, it was there. Andrea Clark, co-developer, ballistics lead. The silence that followed was not quiet, it was stunned, uneasy, reverent. Brett Callan stood frozen, mouth slightly open. "We all use it," he repeated, quieter this time. Cody Banks returned to the mic, now unsure of his tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think any of us quite understood who we were watching today." Andrea stayed prone. The Barrett rested beside her like part of her spine. She did not smile, did not speak. The wind circled the rim again, quieter now, like it too was listening. She finally sat up, slowly, gathered her pack. Dust clung to her sleeves. Cameras continued rolling. They didn't know whether to clap or kneel. The judges didn't announce the rescoring formally. It happened in murmurs, over clipboards and muttered comparisons, one official pulling another aside behind the tented scoring booth. Andrea stood near her bench, quietly packing up. No one approached her directly, not at first. But they watched. A new leaderboard projection blinked to life on the screen above the benches. Her name rose up the columns, rank by rank, until it stopped highlighted in gold at the very top. Andrea didn't glance at it. She slid her notebook into the outer pocket of her bag and zipped it closed. Cody Banks returned to the mic. The same voice that had mocked her with crowd-pleasing charm now cracked slightly under the weight of reversal. "We, want to acknowledge something extraordinary here today," he said, clearing his throat. "Andrea Clark. We clearly underestimated a legend in our midst." The crowd shifted. A few clapped, awkward, stilted, the kind of sound people make when they're not sure what reaction is safe. Griffin Rhodes stood near the sideline, arms folded, mouth tight. He said nothing. Brett Callan busied himself with his rifle case, gaze fixed downward. His hands moved too quickly, too deliberately. Andrea remained still. Judges hovered around her range table, each waiting to speak, then retreating when she didn't open the conversation. One leaned down to adjust a scoring tag that had been misfiled earlier. Another passed her the corrected sheet without eye contact. It wasn't apology, it was correction. Rusty Harlan stepped forward with a half smile, hat in hand. "If you're ever interested in consulting," he said, not pushing, just offering. "We're reviewing our training protocols this fall." Andrea gave a nod. Nothing more. The trophy came next, a lacquered piece of maple and brass, shaped like the canyon skyline. The event board offered it with a group standing behind them, smiling too wide. A camera crew hovered nearby, waiting for a shot. She didn't take the trophy. "No press," she said softly. "I didn't come for that." They nodded, sheepish. The photographer lowered his lens. Emery Shaw, the youngest competitor, walked up slowly, holding his hat in both hands like it might slip away. "You don't teach anywhere, do you?" he asked. His voice didn't shake, but it was cautious. Not reverent, just honest. Andrea looked at him for a moment, measured his stance, his breathing. "I could show you something," she said, "for wind breath control." He lit up with a boyish nod. "Please." She knelt beside him, adjusted his shoulder line, tapped 2 fingers just beneath his ribcage. "Count 4 in. Hold. 4 out. Don't tense the exhale. Let the trigger break inside that rhythm." He nodded again, this time with understanding. She stood, brushed the gravel from her knee, and looked once more at the range. The leaderboard still glowed behind her, her name locked at the top. No fanfare, just a row of numbers, now aligned with the truth. As she turned to leave, she opened her phone and disabled the target logic overlay. The interface dimmed to black. Behind her, the crowd didn't part so much as recede. Men who had elbowed past her hours earlier now stepped aside. Some lowered their heads. Others studied her bag, her walk, her ease. None tried to speak. She passed Griffin without acknowledgement. His stare didn't follow. At the edge of the range, the sky had begun to change, sunlight slipping lower into the canyon, casting copper light across the cracked plateau. Wind moved softly around her boots, curling through the silence like it had forgotten what noise sounded like. Andrea kept walking. The sound of her footsteps merged with the dust, the gravel, the breath of the canyon. This time, It carried nothing but stillness. The light had turned to gold by the time Andrea reached her car. The dashboard glowed soft amber under the setting sun, and the canyon stretched out behind her, endless and unchanged. The wind moved gently across the ridge, tugging at the edges of the sagebrush, brushing against the tires as if tracing her path back into the world. She opened the trunk and placed the trophy inside, not discarded, just put away. It didn't matter. Not here. Not now. The weight of it meant nothing compared to what she carried in her chest. Logan's logbook sat on the passenger seat, closed for the first time with no hesitation, not out of grief, not out of duty, but because it had served its purpose. She touched the spine once, then folded her hands in her lap. The phone screen blinked on. A blank message thread, untouched for years, still tied to the number that no longer connected to anything but memory. She typed, "I did it. Not for them. For us." She stared at the words, held them in the quiet for a moment. Then she deleted them. A soft smile tugged at her mouth as she locked the screen. No need to send it. Some messages didn't need to travel. They just needed to be written. Andrea turned the key. The engine hummed to life, smooth and low. No music played. No commentary filled the cabin. Just the sound of tires over gravel, rolling steady down the ridge, toward the long stretch of road that waited beyond Windmark. The wind kept moving. It always would. But it no longer pressed against her. She didn't brace against it now. She moved with it. And for the first time in a long time, there was peace in the silence. True strength isn't proving them wrong. It's remembering you never needed their permission to begin. Sometimes, the world won't see you until you show them what you were never trying to prove. Andrea Clark walked into Windmark Canyon as an outsider, dismissed, mocked, and quietly tested at every turn. But her strength was never loud. It was steady, built through loss, resilience, and knowledge that ran deeper than recognition. She didn't need the spotlight. She needed only one shot that mattered, and when it came, it spoke louder than every insult before it. This story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity, about knowing your worth when no one else does, and holding your ground when the world leans against you. If Andrea's journey moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever held back your power just to belong? Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories that honor quiet strength, earned respect, and the courage to rise without raising your voice.